He tells me good luck. My name is Jason Johnson. I'm an alcoholic. Man, I'm sober only today by the grace of God and the solution I was shown in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're new here, you're wanted, welcome, and needed in Alcoholics Anonymous. And man, you have some phenomenal speakers coming up this weekend. I'm like the bottom of the barrel, so we'll get it out of the way. They had me do a trial run last night to see if I would be able to qualify to stay here today, which I thought was odd, but I did her. You know, my sobriety date's 11/30/07. I have a sponsor. His name's Carl Morris out of Covina, California, and I'm his favorite. He calls me, for Christ's sakes, Jason. I don't know where he gets that from, but you know what I mean? I'm self-appointed there. I said last night that Bob was my grand sponsor, so that I'm probably his favorite, and he said no. He didn't even hesitate. I think I'm like 23rd or 24th on that list, right? But at least I'm on the list. You know, man, everything I have in my life that's of value and any good is the result of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything I'm going to be has the result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank Dave for picking me up, Ben for inviting me, and the committee for everything you do. This is a pretty big deal, you know, and man, there's a lot of people here for right off the bat at 5:30, you know, and that just means there's enthusiasm, there's something going on here. But I have step one, so I'm powerless over alcohol. My life is unmanageable. I'm going to go through, basically, it's just basically my story emphasizing on alcoholism, right, is what I want to do, explain to you, you know, and that alcoholism, look, alcohol became a solution to all my problems, and I didn't know that until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I just drank because I liked the way it made me feel, and I couldn't stop, right, and I just made poor decisions. You know, I started out as a little kid, and, you know, my mom and dad got divorced, and my dad took off, and my mom was a hippie, and I found out last night you have hippies here, so, you know, and we lived up in the woods with a bunch of other hippies, you know, and we lived in a teepee, we lived in a log cabin, we lived in a school bus, you know. Yeah, I guess we just lived the hippie life. What I found out later is my mom grew pot for a living. That's why we lived in the woods. But that's a whole nother story, right? But we lived with a bunch of other hippies, and they all smelled like patchouli oil, and it was just miserable, right? But here's the deal. During the day, everybody got along, but they would start drinking at night, and they'd forget they were hippies, and they'd start beating on each other. And I would see my mom get beat up on a regular basis, right? And again, I didn't know there was anything wrong with that because I didn't know any better, right? And the thing was, is I'd see my mom telling that same person the next morning that she loved him, right? So I'd see her get beat up by a guy, and then she'd say she loved him. And I should have known right then that alcoholism had something going on there, but I didn't know that, right? I didn't have anything to judge it by. I didn't know there was any Leave It to Beaver. I didn't know anything like that. I just know that it gave me some skills in life. You know, that when it got, what I learned in that little bit of time is that when I felt that tension coming, I learned how to de-escalate it by talking really fast, or I'd run and hide. And those are the skills I took into life, you know. Again, I didn't know there was anything to judge that by. But when I started going to school, I was in kindergarten. My mom moved to town, and her house was a party house, right? And I found out you have party houses here because some people stood in line last night and told me. It's one of those houses at 2 o'clock in the morning. There might be 20 adults there. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I might be the only person there. And as a little kid, I didn't know any different then. I didn't know there was Leave It to Beaver. I didn't know people read their kids' bedtime stories. I didn't know people took baths. I didn't know people had dinner times. I just knew that when everybody was gone, if I was the only person in the house and it got dark outside, man, I just pulled all the blinds down on the house and I turned all the lights on and I turned the TV up really loud, right? And that was my defense mechanism, right? And that was just in case somebody came to break in, they'd think there was a party going on and they'd go someplace else and kill somebody else. And it worked, right? I'm here today. Man, there's a lot of bottles of water up here. I mean, there's like, holy crap, there's like crud. There's like 10 bottles of water, and this one's empty, and I know I didn't drink that much, so we'll set that one over here. We're just going to go for another one. Oh, this could be a long 20 minutes. All right. So, you know, and that's what I did, man. I just stayed home at night when nobody was there. But my life changed when I was getting ready to go into the first grade. It was the Sunday before first grade. I say this all the time. I was at home watching this TV show called Happy Days, and the phone started ringing. And it's not like today where it goes to voicemail or it tells you who's calling. It rings until that person gives up, right, basically. And it could be till commercial, right? And it made it all the way to a commercial. And it's not a telephone that's in the front room. It's in the kitchen on the wall. And it stays on the wall. It doesn't go in. It has a long cord, but it stays on the wall. And so I went to the kitchen and I answered that phone, and it was my grandma. And I don't know if there's any grandmas in here, but Yeah, sometimes you grandparents are way too invested in your grandkids' lives, right? You want to know, have I taken a bath? Have I eaten dinner? Am I excited to go to school? Do I have my clothes laid out? Stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with happy days. And I would tell my grandma, yes, 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 yes. And finally, I saw that my show was back on. I said, Grandma, I got to go. She said, sweetie, let me talk to your mom. I said, oh, my mom's not here. She's at the tavern. The phone number is 282-4440. If you call there, this guy Floyd will answer the phone. Ask for Darla. She'll come to the phone and tell you she's having one more pitcher of beer. And, there was a pause for like 5 or 6 seconds. And I said, Grandma, I got to go. And she said, sweetie, give me that number again. And I gave it to her. She said, when your show's over, I want you to go to bed. And when you get up to go to school in the morning, I want you to listen to what the teacher says and be kind to the other kids, right? And that's basically what Carl tells me today, right? You know what I mean? Just be kind to others and generous with your time. Now go, right? And sometimes I do all right. And I said, okay, and I hung up that phone, and now I'm watching this show called Laverne and Shirley. And did somebody just go, aw? There's all sorts of weird noises in Tennessee, right? But there's a knock at the door, right? And as a little kid, you're like 6, 7 years old, man, knocks are not good. And all of a sudden they start beating on the front door, man, and I panic and I crawl underneath this coffee table. And I start building a fort because I don't want to die, right? And I can hear them, all of a sudden they're at the window and they're shaking the window, and all of a sudden I hear this Jason, this grandma, open the door. Man, and I just got relief, right? I just felt better. I went to that front door, I opened it up, my grandma was standing there, and she didn't look like grandma, right? She just looked like she'd been crying. She looked mad. She looked upset. She looked hurt. I mean, she just didn't have that happy-go-lucky vibe. And she said, sweetie, get your stuff. You're coming to live at my house. That's like hitting the lottery, right? Because when you go to Grandma's house, there's Rice Krispie treats, there's homemade cookies, there's popsicles, there's sheets on the bed, the sheets match the pillowcases, but most importantly, there's somebody there all the time. And as a little kid, that's an easy sell, man. So I grab my stuff. I get in her car. We drive to her house. I'm running up the stairs, I'm running through the front room, and I hear this, hey, and I turn around, it's my grandpa, and he's like, what are you doing here? He's like, man, I live here now. You know what I mean? I didn't realize nobody talked to him about it, right? And, he just looked at me and said, yeah, you do, buddy, come here. And he gave me a hug, and I fell asleep on that man's lap every night for the next 4 or 5 years because he made me feel safe, right? And I wasn't an easy kid. I didn't share this last night, but look, I ended up in AA, so obviously I have some issues, and not just drinking, right? And, I used to think I was, my grandma would drop me off at Sunday school, right? And she'd push me in the Sunday school class and say, he has an enthusiasm for life, and she would take off, right? My grandpa would drop me off at the same Sunday school class and say, man, don't let his cuteness get in the way of your common sense. He's either going to be in trouble or talking his way out of trouble. That's all you need to know about that kid. And he would take off, right? And I used to think that was kind of bizarre, even as a little kid. But, I remember being in the 6th grade, and it was a Tuesday. And I remember on Friday, we were all going to dress up what we wanted to be when we grew up, right? And we were going around, the teacher was going around the classroom, and there was doctors, police officers, firemen, a president of the United States. And I remember Miss Bo got to me, and she said, Jason, what are you going to be when you grow up? I said, a bank robber. I don't even know where that came from, right? And she's looking at me, and I couldn't switch jobs because some people stopped their jobs and joined my gang, and so, I was locked in, right? And I remember I went home with a letter from school that day, and I came back on Friday as a rodeo clown. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but that's what I showed up for on Friday. But, I remember sitting underneath the apple tree, and I was talking to Stevie, one of these kids, on that Sunday, and we were waiting, just hanging out, doing what kids do. And he was going to be a police officer when he grew up, and I was going to be a bank robber. And so we were trying to figure out how we could practice. And Stevie said, hey, there's a Kool-Aid stand on the corner. I thought, great. So I went and got a bandana, a cowboy hat, and a BB gun. And I rode my bike up to the corner Kool-Aid stand, and I robbed it, right? And it didn't go well. I'm just going to tell you that right now. If you're going to rob Kool-Aid stands, you're a little old. But if you do, they have no money, right? They have a lot of Kool-Aid, but they have no money. But I watched TV, right? So I took a kid hostage, right? And I told everybody else to go to their bedrooms, get their piggy banks, meet me in my backyard. And I took this kid to the backyard, and I tied him up to the clothesline pole. And, man, everything was going good. But they don't tell you this on TV. What do you do when your grandma yells dinner, right? Because at 5 o'clock on Sundays, when your grandma yells dinner, you eat. At 5 o'clock, if you don't go eat, you don't eat, right? I'm in a predicament. So I tell this kid, hey, I'll be back in about 20 minutes. I got to go eat dinner. And I made a vital mistake. I laid my BB gun down and my bandana and my cowboy hat, and I went inside and I went to eat dinner. And everything was going great until the police officer showed up. And then when the police officer showed up, it's not like today where they videotape. It's like your whole neighborhood shows up, right? So there's like 20, 30 people in the backyard. This kid's squirming and crying. And I'm trying to explain to my grandma the knots wouldn't be that tight. He's squirming around. It's his fault. And my grandpa just starts laughing, like really loud, right? And my grandma didn't like that. And she said, what's so funny? He goes, man, you can't make this up. And then everybody laughed, and I got grounded to the house. And I remember for 30 days. And I remember I didn't know what that meant, so I just started crying, right, because I'd never been grounded before. And my grandpa said, hold on a second, buddy. And he went behind the house with my grandma, because back then I guess you don't argue in public. And he came back. He said, here's the deal. There's no need to ground you to the inside of the house. I didn't tie that young kid up to the clothesline pole. There's no need to punish me, right? You're grounded to the block, right? And right away that guy became my hero, right? And as I grew up, he was my hero, but as I grew up, we grew apart. And I used to think he hated me, right? Because he'd always turn me in. He'd tell the judge where I worked, the police where I was. If I was hiding in the backyard, he's out in the playhouse. I mean, he was just, I said it last night, he was a nuisance, right? I never thought I'd use that word, but I do, right? I kind of like it. I don't even know what it means, but he was that, right? And so as I got older, we grew apart. My grandma, on the other hand, she just loved me. I don't know if there's anybody in here who has somebody that just loved them no matter what, right? And that was my grandma, right? She just wouldn't give up on me. But I used to think that the only reason she did that is because she felt sorry for me. I thought it was because she just, if any of my aunts and uncles went on vacation, they had to take me. If I had a baseball game, everybody showed up. And I know it's because my grandma told them to, right? So I just thought she kind of felt sorry for me, and she was just babying me along. But I remember I was in the 6th grade, and I started going to middle school, and I had to take a school bus. And, I got kicked off the school bus. Yeah, it's kind of obvious now that I tell my story that I would get kicked off the school bus. But for the longest time, I thought it was just a myth. But I get kicked off the school bus, and I have to walk home. And it's my first day to walk home, and my grandma comes in, pulls up, and I'm like, she's here to save me. She said, sweetie, we need to go inside and talk to some people. And we went inside this room, and there was like a round table, and there was a teacher, a lady from a special needs school, a principal, and a couple counselors. And we sat down. They proceeded to tell my grandma everything I'd done wrong for the first 3 months of school, that I had no self-control, that I hit other kids, that I talked all the time, and I really couldn't read or write at that level, right? And they didn't really understand why I was in that class. And, my grandma just sat there, right? She had that same look until when she came to get me, like when she wanted to cry, she looked mad, she did this, and she just sat there. And finally, when they were done sharing everything, she said, may I say something? And she said, absolutely. They said, absolutely. And she said, look, I'm not going to deny Jason did any of those things. He lives at my house. He's a tough kid, but he's a good kid, and there's a good person inside of there. And the reason I know this is every morning on the way to school, he runs down to Mrs. Harrington's house, and he throws her newspaper up on the front porch so she doesn't have to walk down the stairs. And Shane, the young man who's simple-minded, every time I see him at church on Sunday or the grocery store, the first thing he asks is, where's Jason? Because nobody picks on him when Jason's around. And when they play sports, Jason always picks him first to be on his team. Nobody told him to do those things. He did them on his own. So I believe there's a good kid inside of there. And I ended up having my best year of school that year, right? But here's the thing. I remember walking out of that hospital and looking up at my grandma, and as we're walking out of the hall, looking up at her, and for the first time in my life, believing that somebody loved me, right? And somebody had my back and somebody cared for me, man. And that lady became my hero. Everywhere she went, I went, And so I had a great life, right? I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't doing anything. But here's the deal. That same year, I went to go sleep in my friend's backyard. And in Oregon, you don't sleep in the backyard a lot. I don't think you probably sleep in the backyard a lot here because it's hot, right? I'm not judging. I'm just reporting. So Sean, the guy who I tied up to the clothesline pole, became one of my best friends. So there is Alan on here. I took a hostage right off the bat, right? And we went over to Lace's house to sleep in Lace's backyard, and we get to his house, and we're setting up the backyard to do what you have to do. And Lace's mom comes out and tells us, hey, there's $10 on the counter. We ordered you a pizza. Pay the pizza guy, stay in the house. All the adults are going bowling. And that's great news when there's no parents and you're in the 6th grade and you have a telephone and you have a pizza. And yeah, so the pizza came. Right when the pizza came, my friend Leif said, hey, pizza tastes better with beer. I'd never drank beer before, but I said, yes, it does. And he went and got some Lucky Lager beer, and it was nasty. Right? You people that come in here and tell me, I felt like I arrived. That's horse crap. I had to plug my nose and hang in there, man. That stuff was nasty, right? It was god awful, but I gave her a shot, and I found out if you just hang in there, everything's going to be all right. And a couple hours later, we're in the backyard throwing rocks at cars and having a blast, right? But it's the damnedest thing, man. I got food poisoning the same night I drank, right? Unbelievable, right? And man, I'm talking, that pizza was bad, man. I was sicker than a dog. And I told my buddies I got to go home, and I rode my bike home. Leif came to hear me talk, and he said that was probably my first DUI. But I remember I get home, and I went into my grandma's room, and I told her I don't feel good, and she just looked at me with disgust, and I was sick all night. Nobody came to check on me until the next morning. And the next morning I show up, and I wake up, and my grandpa's at the end of my bed telling me, get up, you got to go to work. I said, man, I don't have a job. He said, get up, you got to go to work. I said, man, I don't feel good. And he said to me, if you're going to drink like a big boy, you're going to work like a big boy, now let's go. And I thought my grandma would do what grandmas are supposed to do, like save you. But she didn't. She handed me a warm egg salad sandwich and a thermos of warm milk and told me have a great day. Yeah. And we went and picked up Leif and Sean, who felt like I felt, right? And it was miserable. And I remember picking strawberries, and I looked at my buddies and said, I'm not drinking anymore. And they said, you don't like the alcohol? I said, I don't mind the alcohol, I just don't want to work, right? So I quit cold turkey, no AA, no 12 steps, no treatment, nothing. For me, this is where the obsession kicked in and the allergy kicked in, is when I got to high school, right? Because I started playing sports. I was good at sports. I played sports in the week, and I drank on the weekends. The obsession for me, and I know today because of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, is I would save my lunch money Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, pitch in with some other guys, buy a bunch of booze, and drink on the weekends. Nobody was going to jail. Nobody was dying of a heroin overdose. Nothing. We were just drinking and having a good time. But the obsession kicked in, right? On May 5th, 1989, I stole a motorcycle. And I know I used to say I borrowed it. It sounds better. I'm still having a hard time telling the truth, right? And I stole this motorcycle, and I got in a high-speed chase, I guess. They were chasing me, and I crashed, and I woke up in an ICU in a hospital not knowing what happened. And I don't know if this is where the unmanageability comes in. I didn't know what happened, right? And I don't know if anybody's ever came out of a blackout, and you're like going, right? Sometimes you're in cuffs and they're asking you questions, and sometimes you're like in a hospital with a bunch of tubes, and you're like, hey, am I going to die? And this lady said, no. And I said, well, what happened? She said, you're in a drunk driving accident on a motorcycle. I said, well, I don't own a motorcycle. And she said, we know. And I remember asking her, am I going to die? She said, you're not going to die, but you'll probably lose your left leg. And if you don't lose your left leg, you'll never walk normal again. And I remember making a decision right then and there that I'll never drink alcohol ever again. Right? But I'm here to tell you about 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, that obsession and that craving kicked in, man, and I couldn't stop. Man, and I just started drinking. The only thing that takes that stuff away is alcohol. Right? And I just lowered my standards to keep up with my quality of life. Really? So now I'm living in an abandoned house with a bunch of guys and whoever, and I'm drinking when I'm doing whatever I can to kill that sickness, to kill that void. But anytime I put alcohol in my body, I can justify why I live in a homeless house. Right? And I was okay with that. Alcohol made that okay. And the problem is about once a month, one of my uncles would show up wherever I'm staying, and they say, hey, we have to go to a payphone, you got to call Grandma. And I'd ask her, why do I call Grandma? He goes, man, because she calls every hospital, every jail, every institution. She calls all of us in the morning. Anybody seen Jason? Anybody know where Jason is? Is Jason alive? Can somebody please go find Jason? So you need to call her and tell her you're okay so she'll leave us alone. And so I'd go to that payphone. And I'd put that dime in that payphone, and I'd call my grandma, and I'd tell her, Grandma, I'm doing really good. I have a great job. And I'll come see you. Or I'd tell her I'd come see her that day. But what the problem is when I put alcohol in my body, I can justify and rationalize why I don't show up. Right? And I just don't go. Right? And then if I did go, I remember I would sit at her coffee table or kitchen table, and we'd sit there, and she'd talk to me and, give me, feed me, do all that stuff. And she'd sit down, and about every time she would get up to go to the bathroom, and I would look over, and there'd be $5 sticking out of her purse or laying on the counter, and I'd grab that $5 and I would go. Right? Because that's what alcohol does to me, man. When I drink, I just lose all accountability for anything, and I don't care about anybody else. And I would do that over and over and over. And that lady didn't have an Al-Anon. She just had a church, right? And she had a grandson that she loved no matter what. And she was just watching me die. And I just kept drinking, and I kept drinking, and I kept drinking. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. On December 5th or December 4th, 1997, My Uncle Leroy showed up. I had got kicked out of an abandoned house, and so now I'm living in a tent in the backyard before that was popular. And I'm in this tent, and my Uncle Leroy shows up, and he says, "Hey, buddy, your grandma has been in ICU for about 2 weeks. They took her off her life support. You should probably come say goodbye." I told him I don't really want to go. He said, "I didn't ask you if you want to go. You're going to go." And he's a big biker guy, so I went. And as soon as we got in his truck, he handed me a pint of vodka, and he said, "Just chug it." Right? And I remember chugging that vodka, and I felt okay. Right? And I remember driving to that hospital. And look, I shared this last night. I'm the kind of guy that at the end of my running, I remember being in the middle of at a drug house, buying drugs from these guys who don't speak English, and a commercial would come on for a treatment center, and they all stopped what they were doing and looked at me. Right? That's not a good sign, right? They're like, "Hey, you got to..." Yeah, that's what alcoholism does for me, right? But when I put alcohol in my body, I'm okay being that guy. Right? I'm okay being that guy. And I remember getting off that elevator. I went up this elevator, and I got off, and my whole family, I have a big family, they're all sitting on this side. I went to this side of the room. Not one person came over to talk to me, not even my mom. Right? And finally, my aunt came over and said, "You just need to get in there, say goodbye, and get out of here." And I said, "Okay." And I went in that room, and my Uncle Gary was sitting there, and he said, "Man, just talk to her like she's here. She hasn't been awake all day, but she can hear you. Just hold her hand and start talking to her." So I sat down, I grabbed her hand, I started talking to her, and I say what you have to say. And all of a sudden, she opens her eyes, and then she starts talking to me, man, and I just panic. Because I didn't know what to do. Right? And I just told Grandma, "I have a really good job. I'm working out of town, but there's a lot of people here that would like to see you. I'll come back tomorrow and visit with you." Right? And she said, "Okay." And she told me she loved me, and she was going to pray for me and a bunch of stuff. And the thing that hurt me the most is I remember as I was leaving that room, she told my Uncle Gary, "He's a good kid. You watch, he'll do something with his life." Man, I just nutted up. Man, I went back to my tent, and I drink the way you drink. Right? When I put alcohol in my body, I can justify and rationalize why I don't do anything. Right? What happened was about two or 3 days later, my Uncle Dale showed up at my tent to let me know that my grandma had passed, and his family would pick me up and take me to the memorial. And I said, "Okay." And the day of that memorial came, man, I hid in the closet with a bottle of Goldschlager and some Jägermeister, and I didn't come out. Right? And I could hear him beating on that window saying, "You're going to regret this for the rest of your life." I heard him saying stuff like, "You're being an idiot," stuff like that. But I put alcohol in my body, and I'm powerless over what I'm going to do. And I can justify and rationalize why I don't come out of that closet, because I don't want to go. If I can't show up for you when you're alive and you're the person that loved me no matter what, why would I ruin your day? Right? And I drink like you have to drink. And I would do that for the next 2 weeks. About 2 weeks into that drinking, man, I ran out of stuff. And I don't know if anybody here has ever ran out of anything, but it gets bad, right? That last 3 days when you don't have anything to put in your body and you're sweating from the inside out and everybody's making noises. And I made a vital mistake, man. I called my Uncle Gary. It was a Sunday morning. I asked him if he was going to go to church. He said yes. And Gary's like my brother. We're only like 7 years apart. He's in the program, but he's beat me up a lot, but I didn't think he'd beat me up in church, right? And so we get to this church, and we're sitting in these pews, and I'm at one end of the church pew, and everybody else is at that side of the church, and I don't know why. I guess I smelt maybe or something like that, or I didn't bring a friend. I don't know. And they start singing this song, "How Great Thou Art." Man, I got caught up in that moment. I don't even know the song, but it started making me tear up a little bit, and then they sang that song, "Amazing Grace," and I really got caught up, and I told my uncle, "Hey, I think I have a drinking problem." He's like, "You think?" And the whole church went quiet, right? And I said, "Yeah, I do, I think." And so what he did is he told me to come over to his house. He would feed me, wash my clothes, and give me $20, and we'd figure out what to do with my life. And I went to his house, and everything was going as planned until I came out of that shower. He said, "Hey, you're going to go to treatment." And I go, "What's treatment?" He goes, "This is no time for negotiations. You're going to go to look up in the phone book," which is Google, and look up treatment centers. And there were only hospitals back then, so I didn't think hospitals were open on Sunday, so I called one, and sure enough, they answered on the first ring. And I told this lady, "Hey, I think I have a drinking problem." She got all excited, and she passed me over to another lady, and I told this lady some more stuff, and she said, "Can you be here tomorrow at 8 a.m.? I said, "Sure." She said, "We're going to do an assessment." I said, "Whatever." And I said, "Okay, I'll be there." And so hung up the phone. I told my uncle, "Hey, I have this assessment thing tomorrow at 8 a.m. Give me $20. I'll tell you how it went." He said, "No, you're going to stay at my house." Whoa. He has a plastic couch. It's not leather. It's plastic. He says, to this day, he says it's leather, but it ain't. And he has a little dog that licked me all night, right? So I'm on this plastic. The sheet was gone the first turn, right? So I have this plastic couch. This dog's licking me, and it's just miserable, right? And all I could think is, man, if I could put something in my body, I'm going to be all right, right? And I got up, and I went to take a shower the next morning, and when he went to the shower, I remembered he had a liquor cabinet. And before I even went to that liquor cabinet, I was okay, right? And I went to that liquor cabinet, I put some Bacardi 151 in a pop can, I started chugging it. And by the time he came out of the shower, I was ready to go to this thing called treatment. Right? And we got in his car and we're driving along. He goes, man, I smell alcohol. I said, it's not me. I'm going to treatment. Right? Which I know today, that's just what everybody says, right? And he just looked at me with disgust, and I chugged that booze as fast as I could, and we went into the hospital or this waiting room or whatever it is. I went to the bathroom to hide my pop can. He went in and he answered yes to something. I was in treatment. Right? And I don't know what detox, I don't know what treatment is. I just know this is a bad idea, but I'm all in. I have nothing else to do, and I have a buzz going on. And I'm here to tell you I was in the worst detox center in the state of Oregon. Quite far, because it had no caffeine, it had no sugar, and it had no women. Right? And I'm 26 years old living in a tent and some bushes, but, those are big deals. And I thought treatment was like prison. I didn't know you could just leave. I thought you were locked in there for you had to escape. And so I'm watching how to escape. I'm looking at shift changes. I'm looking at the elevator go up and down. Dude, I'm getting out of here. This is a bad idea, right? It was December 29, 1997. There was only 4 other guys, and they need to be in treatment, right? And but these 4 guys were talking about this thing called A&A. And so I said, what's A&A? And they said, well, there's caffeine, there's sugar, and there's women. And I said, I'm all in, right? I don't know how in. I said, how do we get there? They said, a van's going to pick us up and take us. I was like, even better, I can escape from there. And I need to tell you, about 3 years before this went down, my dad called my mom out of the blue to pay back all the back child support he owed. And I went to this bank for maybe 30 seconds to get my half of the money, which I said last night I had to pay back because of sponsorship. I said hi to this guy. I don't need a dad. Took my share of the money and I left, and I went and drank like you drink. 3 years later, I'm in this van going to this thing called A&A, and I prayed to a God that I don't believe in. I said, God, please don't let me know anybody in AA, and if I do, please don't let me owe them any money. Right? That's the only prayer. Nothing about staying sober. I'm planning on escaping. Right? That's my whole goal is. And I get to this place, and sure enough, we walk in there. There's caffeine, there's sugar, and there's some ladies with maybe one set of teeth, but that's details when you're trying to escape, right? And I see a guy standing on the back of the wall. I said, man, that looks like my dad. They said, you don't know who your dad is? I said, man, I've seen him one time in 26 years. They said, well, you got to go say something. Well, they had a break in the meeting. I walk up to this guy. I said, hey, do you know who I am? He said, nope. I said, I think you're my dad. And he said, Jason? And I said, yeah. And I met my dad at my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And yeah. That's kind of life-changing. And I shared this last night. My grandma used to always say dorky stuff like you have to participate in your prayers. Like I told her, hey, I prayed I'll win the game on Saturday. She told me to go to practice. I prayed for a bicycle. She made me mow the lawn. But one thing my grandma used to always tell me is God never says no. God either says yes, not right now, or I got something better. God never says no. And I used to think that was the dumbest thing because I remember being a little kid sitting on that front porch on a Friday after school, probably in the 3rd or 4th grade, waiting for my mom and dad to come pick me up to take me somewhere for the weekend, and they wouldn't show. And I remember one weekend I sat on that front porch, the street light came on, and I came back in the house, and I went to my grandma. I said, Grandma, I'm not going to your Sunday school class anymore. And she said, why is that? I said, I've been praying to that Jesus guy every morning, every night for 2 weeks that my mom or my dad would come pick me up and take me somewhere this weekend, and they didn't show. So I don't think he likes me, so there's no need for me to go. And then she said, okay. And I went back in, and my grandpa was sitting there. I told my grandpa I never want to sit on that front porch ever again. He said, buddy, you never have to sit on that front porch ever again if you don't want to. And I got up on his lap, and I made a decision right there. I don't need a God, and I don't need a mom and a dad. And I was okay with who I was, right? 20-some years later, I'm sitting on that porch on a Friday night. I just got released from my detox center, and I'm waiting for members of Alcoholics Anonymous to come pick me up to take me to AA. And it's not like today where they call you or text you, hey, we're almost there. They start honking the horn like 3 blocks away to let everybody know we're going to AA, right? And, sure enough, this car pulls up with a bunch of guys, and I run down there. You know who's there to pick me up to take me to my meeting? It's my dad. So God either says yes, not right now, or I got something better. I just have to trust the process. He took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I met a lady. I kissed her. She got pregnant. Then she got divorced, and then we got married. Yeah. It's almost like Kentucky. Oh, man. And let me tell you something. For the next 3 years, man, I did one meeting a month. Yeah, I was insane. The only reason I was doing this, it was a speakers meeting. There was like 500 people. They met once a month. It's called SSAL, sit down, shut up, and listen. And I was the raffle chair, and I was stealing half the money. I know you find that hard to believe, right? But I paid it back. I had that same sponsor that believes in paying people their money back. And yeah, it was that Saturday. I didn't want to go, so I got in a fight with my wife, and I asked her for a divorce, and she said no. I didn't know you could just do that. I thought you had to get attorneys and talk about it. But she said, no, I'm going to the meeting. Maybe you should go. And I did I made a vital mistake. I went into a bedroom. I got a Bible and a big book, and I wrote a resignation letter to Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah, and I dated it and signed it. She knows, right? And yeah, I didn't know it was going to haunt me for the rest of my life. But I wrote this letter, and it was pretty good. And I took it to this meeting, and there's this guy named John B., who I thought was the president of AA in Oregon, because he had a bunch of naughtigans. You guys call them pigeons, sponsees, greeters. I call them naughtigans. You know, like they're the ones when you show up at a meeting, they're like a greeting line, and you're like, good God, not again, because they want to touch you, talk to you, hug you, right? Or they get called on in the meeting. They talk about sponsorship, the allergy of the body, the session. Stuff has absolutely nothing to do with AA when you're new, right? And so I'd like, good God, not again. So I just named them all not against, because he had a lot of them, right? And so I walk up to him, and I hand him my letter in front of all these people, and he opens up and he starts reading, and he starts laughing, like really loud, right? Like Disneyland. And he hands it to these not-against, and they're passing it around, and they're laughing. And the letter still gets passed around on my birthday. And and I can't find out who has the copies, because I take rid of that thing. But yeah, I didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden he said no. I go, what do you mean no? He goes, I'm not going to allow you to leave Alcoholics Anonymous. What accidentally came out of my mouth is, will you sponsor me? Dude, he quit laughing just like that, right? He's like, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? I was like, oh, whatever, yeah. He goes, this is what you're going to do. You're going to get on your knees twice a day. At morning, you're going to get on your knees and you're going to say, please help, thank you, amen. And then at night, you're just going to get on your knees and say, thanks. God don't need to hear any more from you. You'd be trying to con him. I was like, all right, that makes sense. So you're going to read 2 pages out of the big book. For the rest of your sobriety, you're going to call me every morning at 6:30 a.m. You're going to go to 5 meetings a week, 2 where he was at. And I couldn't drink in between meetings. Right? And you know what? Within 30 days, I was the head Nottingham. I was self-appointed. My job in Alcoholics Anonymous was the head greeter. My job was to shake every woman's hand that walked into my meeting and look her in the eye and make sure she felt safe and had a safe place to sit in my meeting. Every guy that walked in, I had to hug him, tell him I love him, and I'm doing better every day in every way. Very unnecessary, very uncalled for, very awkward, right? Some people I hugged 2 or 3 times. And, man, you know what? I just fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. But I didn't do any work, right? I did that for 9 years. About 8 years into this, man, I just started selling drugs. Let's just get right to it, right? Let's not skip anything. I couldn't stand you people, right? I sat in the back. You always had, like I said last night, Amy had her birthday the same day every year. You know, this person's family came all the time. This person's going to, there's always that person in your meeting. You're like, good God, they're not sharing again, are they? And so I just sat in the back and I started selling drugs, right? And I got pretty good at it, and I thought I was doing pretty good at it, but here's the deal. At 9 years of sobriety, I bought a car. I took it to this place called Les Schwab. I put some wheels and tires on the car, and I pulled out, and a wheel fell off, and I crashed. And they said, hey, it's our fault. We'll rent you a car till we get your car fixed. I said, great. They rented me this Chrysler 300. It looked like a Rolls Royce. It said Hemi on the side. I thought I had arrived. I went and met these guys that I had been meeting every day for about a year, and I'm driving down the road after I met them, and all of a sudden a bunch of cops swarm my car. Well, they call it a task force. And I didn't know what to do. It's a rental car, but I have valid driver's license, proof of insurance. It's a rental car. I haven't had a drink or drug for 9 years, and I go to AA. I should probably be able to talk my way out of this, right? And so I put the dope underneath the front seat, and I just waited, right? And eventually an officer walked up to the car, and he tapped on the window. I rolled it down. He said, Jason, which is another bad sign. Didn't even ask me for any of my credentials. He said, could you shut the car off and step up on the curb? And I said, well, I can do that. And so I shut the car off and I open up the door, and as I'm getting out of here, and I look down and my seat's moving back all by itself, right? I've never had a car with a memory seat. To this day, I don't, right? I turn that thing right off, right? And I didn't know what to do. You can't yell time out, right? Or do over, you know what I mean? And you can't definitely not reach underneath the seat to try to move your dope, because you probably get shot, because everybody had a gun but me. And so I just shut the door and hoped they didn't see it. And they did. They did. They're pretty sharp. They charged me with commercial delivery, commercial possession, racketeering, intimidation of a federal witness, and a gun charge with 9 years of sobriety going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm here to tell you, my life was unmanageable. You know what I mean? And man, I burned it to the ground. I put a needle in my arm, I relapsed, and I started doing things. I signed the rights away to my daughter for $20 and a ride to a drug house. My wife divorced me. She has remarried me, which, you know, when she divorced me, I thought it was a bad idea. She remarried me. AA thought it was a bad idea, right? Yeah, I just burned it to the ground. Burned it to the ground. I was right back where I was. I could not stop drinking, right? And that anxiety and that fear was so overwhelming that the only thing that would take it away or give me any kind of relief was alcohol. And I would just drink and drink and drink. I finally got sentenced on November 30th, 2007. I got sentenced to 48 months in prison. And, you know, I remember I got put in the hole. And like I said last night, if you ever get arrested in the state of Oregon, the sheriff's office has been running the jail system since the 1800s. They don't need your opinion. That'll save you some time by yourself. I got put in this hole and I didn't know what to do. And I remember sitting on that bunk and I could hear John's voice saying, you probably should pray. And I got on my knees and I said, please help, thank you, amen. And I got back on that bunk. If I got any kind of relief, I got back down on my knees and I said, thanks. About day 3 or 4, I remember sitting on that concrete bunk in that cell, looking at this piece of metal over the toilet. And I thought to myself, I could see a reflection. I realized I'm a piece of crap. I'm a mess, man. I'm a guy I despise. I never wanted to be this guy. For some reason, for the first time in my life, I got on my knees and I told God, I think I'm powerless over alcohol and I need some help. And my life changed, right? All those 9 years before that, man, I was just running on pure luck. If you're sitting in here and you're causing some kind of commotion, you're not living an honest life, or you're doing those kinds of things, you don't have to live like that, right? All I had to do was get on my knees and admit I was powerless over alcohol, and my life changed just like that. At 3 months and 27 days, I got released to serve my time in the community. Some judges in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in my area signed some paperwork and got me a suspended sentence. So I had to do 3.5 years in the state of Oregon, and then I had to do 3 years of parole. And now I'm a free guy, right? But I'm going to tell you, when I got released, the only requirement I had to have in my life was I had to stay sober and I had to get a job. And I've been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing since that day. The day I finally admitted I was powerless over alcohol, I was not locked up here anymore. Right? I was not locked up here anymore. And I got out, and I've been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like I said, in good standing, unless you go to my home group. Depends on who you ask, right? If you ask somebody I sponsor, I'm doing really good. If you ask that lady over there, nah, he's a train wreck, right? I'm the reason they have business meetings. And, you know, I got out and I had to start changing my life. And I didn't know how unmanageable my life was. I didn't know what I was going to do without alcohol to put in my body. And I came in here and I got in the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my life started to change. You know, and I had a daughter. When my daughter was 7 years old when I got arrested, and when I got out, when I got all done, she was about 13. And today she's getting married next weekend. And, yeah. I guess you're applauding for me going broke, but that's all right. You know what I mean? I'm not judging or anything, but look, my relationship with my daughter, I had to change. I didn't know how much you wreck somebody's life when you're drinking, right? I didn't know how much I was tearing it up. And look, I'm not a great dad. And I remember when my daughter was 13 years old, she was 17 years old. My wife came to me and said, hey, we're going on vacation. I said, sweet, where are we going? She said, Canada. I said, I can't go to Canada. She said, we know. And away they went, right? I stayed home and dog sitted. I didn't know, well, you don't dog sit your own dog, but it felt like that's what I was doing. And they went, and they're gone for like 2 weeks, and they come back, and my daughter goes to her room. My wife comes in the house and says, hey, we need to talk. I said, all right. She goes, no, this is serious, and you can't overreact. I said, give it to me. She said, Bailey got a tattoo. Ooh, I wasn't ready for that. I saw stripper poles. I saw tramp stamp. I saw Aerosmith videos. Yeah, I went crazy, right? I called my wife names. I yelled at her, told her she's going to prison. We're getting a divorce. I can't believe you got a tattoo on a 17-year-old kid. How'd that happen? And she just looked at me with pure disgust. So I went upstairs, man, and I laid into my daughter, who's 17 years old. I called her things that if you said to her, I have no problem going back to prison, right? And I just laid into her, and she just cried, and she just cried. Look, and I had 5 years of sobriety at the time, and I went downstairs, and my wife said she kicked me out of the house, but I went and I got in my car, and I was going for a ride, and I called an Al-Anon is what I did, right? Because I figured Al-Anons would know how to get an alcoholic arrested, get a tattoo removed, and this has probably happened before, right? And get, and maybe a divorce, right? So I called the Al-Anon, because if you call Joe in AA, he's going to tell you the solution before you're even done telling the problem. Did you pray about it, inventory, talk to God, turn it over, all that stuff? I need an answer. This is a big deal, right? So I call Al-Anon, and man, I called the wrong Al-Anon, right? And because it took her like 4 miles to finally tell me what I did wrong, right? She told me that I told my daughter she was not beautiful, that she had that her body was my body, and that I shouldn't tell. Yeah, she just made me sound bad, right? And very low and very disgusting, right? And I go, what do I got to do? She said, you got to go back and make that right. And I could hear her husband, who's in AA, going, you better invite God to go with you. And I'm like, you know what I mean? I don't need no help from AA. I'm doing just fine. So I got back to my driveway, and I sat there, and I invited God to go with me. And I heard a guy say at that retreat a couple weeks ago that I should have let God go in first, right? I should have invited him to go in first, but I went in first, and I went upstairs, and first I told my wife I think I overreacted. She said, you did. And I went upstairs. My daughter was still crying, and I had to make that amends, right? I had to tell her I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. I don't care what you do with your body. I don't care who you love. I don't care what you believe in. I don't care. As long as you're happy, I'm happy. And you need to know that no matter what. She goes, I know, Dad. We knew you were going to overreact. So I became a victim, right? I said, well, maybe you could have texted me or something. She goes, would it matter? Probably not. She goes, you want to see the tattoo? Yeah, I guess. You know what I mean? And she lifts up her shirt, and on the side of her chest, there's an AA symbol, and it says one day at a time. And there's a hand going like this and a hand going like this. But I used my inside voice. I didn't say this out loud, because the first thing I thought is, good God, I hope you're not an alcoholic. And second, what's with the praying hands? We're not Catholic. But I didn't say that. She goes, you want to know what it means? I said, sure. She said, if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous, you and Mom would have never met, and I wouldn't be here. And the hand going like this is Mom's hand, because she always makes the coffee and serves the cookies at the meeting. The hand going like this is yours, Dad, because you're always welcoming people to Alcoholics Anonymous and give them a hand up. So now I'm on the side of the bed crying, right? Paulie P told me that was God kicking me in the nuts. I wasn't crying, right? So I avoid that, lady. My life is unmanageable even when I don't have alcohol in my body. I'm an unmanageable guy. Like I said, my daughter's getting married. She works at the courthouse, and she just graduated with something. And she's getting ready to go to law school, but there's a bunch of girls in our house for a sorority thing or something. And they were trying to talk my daughter into running for president of the United States. So I said, hey, can I have a cabinet position? She said no. Didn't even hesitate, right? And I said, well, what can I do at the White House? She said, you could be a greeter. Yeah. All righty, I'll take the job. You know what I mean? But the coolest thing about that whole conversation was when I was standing right there, one of my daughter's friends said, isn't your dad's past going to hurt you in your employment? And without even skipping a beat, my daughter said, my dad's past is my greatest asset. Even when my life's unmanageable, if I apply this step to my life gets better. Step one's the only step I have to do every day for me, right? I have to make sure I don't put alcohol in my body, and I have to realize that I have to do the other 11 steps to be in the game, right? But I have to surrender every day, and today our life is good. I don't know what it's going to be like next week, because my house is chaotic right now, right? And so, she's getting married. I tried to see I asked if I could take her off of the car insurance and she could pay her own phone bill, but she said no. So I guess nothing changes in my house when you get married. Just feed another person, right? And but we have a great life today, right? And my life has gotten better. My relationship with my wife is good. It's not great, but it's doing good. The amends with my grandparents. I came here, and when I didn't realize how much alcohol did in my life. I didn't know how much I wrecked people's lives. I didn't know how much that it had control of me. I didn't realize how the obsession. took after me, right? And I didn't realize the damage I was doing to people. And so when I finally sobered up and I got into the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew I had to make amends to my grandparents. And I didn't know how to make amends to my grandma yet, but my grandpa was alive, so I went to his house and I told my grandpa, I said, hey, Grandpa, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm in AA. He says, Jason, everybody knows you're in AA. I said, well, there's a step. I borrowed a lot of money and stole a lot of money from you and Grandma. He goes, oh, I know. I said, I don't know how much. He says, I do. And he goes in my grandma's room and he comes back with these spiral notebooks. My grandma's like the mob, right? She had written down every nickel, like Jason stole 25 cents, Jason picked up apples, has 10 cents credit. I mean, every IOU, every insurance payment, every time I went to jail, every doctor's appointment, any kind of money I borrowed from her, she wrote it down. Why? Right? That's ridiculous. I looked at my grandpa and said, I can't pay all this money back. He says, I know you can't. I said, what do I got to do? He said, just keep helping people. I was like, that's a good idea. But it said in here, it said 1984, it said Jason stole $5, Jason stole $5, Jason stole $5. I said, hey, Grandpa, how do you know I stole $5 in 1984? He goes, oh, that's an easy one. Every Thursday I put $5 in the coffee cup in the hutch. Every Friday morning it was gone. And the only people who live here are the author of the books, the guy who put the money in the cup, and you. Well, you don't have to be Perry Mason to figure out I was the thief, right? And but I said to him, I said, Grandpa, why didn't you tell me to stop? And he said something to me. This is the guy I thought that hated me, right? And was always out to get me. He said to me, Jason, stealing isn't wrong until it's wrong to you. And I'd rather you steal from me than our neighbors or your friends. And that's the guy I thought that hated me, right? And so I got in my car and I was driving home. I called John. He said, how much you have to pay back? I said, nothing. So I went back. And, and I ended up buying my grandpa cable TV till the day he died. And, 2 weeks after he got cable TV, man, he called me and we talked about every channel. We talked about Pawn Stars. We talked about the History Channel. We even talked about the channel I said last night that goes, bah. He watched that for 10 minutes. He said, that's all it does. You know what I mean? He gave every channel a minute, right? But at the end of that conversation, he told me, man, this is one of the coolest gifts anybody's ever given me. That's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's because I took my first step and I became willing to do this deal. The amends with my grandma, I didn't know how to make that because she was dead. I don't know if anybody in here has somebody that they love or somebody that's already been after them or looked after them that haunts you. But I had that. Man, I went to the graveyard. I looked for butterflies, dragonflies, bluebirds, potato bugs, all sorts of stuff. I wrote letters. I sat there. I set flowers. I did everything you guys would suggest, and I would get some relief, but it wouldn't take away that ache. It just wouldn't take it away. And I was praying about it. About 7 years of sobriety, I got a text from this guy, Jimmy Jack, and he sent me this story because he says that says I don't follow directions very well. But if you tell me a story and I can feel it, you have me, right? And there was a story about this little boy who was the firstborn in his family, and his sisters were born. His dad started paying attention to his sisters, and he got really jealous. And he went to his mom and dad and asked his mom and dad if he could play football because he knew his dad loved football. And right away they signed him up, and right away this little kid said that was a bad idea, right? He's a trumpet player. But he kept playing the sport because after every practice, every game, his dad would come find him and give him a hug and tell him he loved him, how proud he was of him. And so the little kid just kept playing. He played all the way to his senior year in high school, and his team's going to the state championship for the very first time. And it's a practice about 2 weeks before the big game, and the coach calls him over in front of everybody and says, I don't know how to tell you this, but your dad had a heart attack today and he didn't make it. And the young man hit his knees, and he's down there for a little bit. He stands up and he asks the coach, is it okay if I go home a little early today? And the coach said, this is just a game. Go take care of your family. Don't worry about football. And the young man says, thanks. And then he gets up and he leaves. And the big game comes 2 weeks later, and his team's losing really bad. He doesn't show up till the third quarter. He comes running out, and his team's losing, and like I said, and so he runs up to the coach. He asks him if he can play, and the coach is like, whatever, we're losing anyway. So he puts him in there. The kid intercepts the ball and runs it back for the touchdown. The coach is like, wow, that was pretty good. Might as well stay in the game. This kid ends up winning the state championship. The worst player in school history wins the state championship for his high school team. And that night, as the coach is leaving the locker room, he sees the young man sitting in the back by himself, and he walks over and starts talking to him. He says, man, I need to ask you something. He says, you're not really the best athlete I've ever coached. What happened out there last night? He said, that was a phenomenal game of football. He says, Coach, I don't know if you know this or not, but after every single game or every single practice, even the games you didn't play me or the ones I lost the game for us, no matter what, my dad would come give me a hug, tell me he loved me and how proud he was of me. The coach said, man, you had a great dad. He goes, I know. And as the coach is walking away, the young man says, Coach, I don't know if you know this or not, But my dad was blind, and tonight's the first night he ever really got to see me play. And just like that, I got relief, because I know that every time I walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I say, my name's Jason, I'm an alcoholic, my grandma gets to see that. Every time I find a new person in there and I walk up to him and say, hey, can I get you a book? Can I get you a cup of coffee? And I take somebody through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, my grandma gets to see that. You can't make that up. You did that for me. I know that when I die and I go to that big meeting in the sky, that's the first place I'm going, because I got to make sure there's a bill bobbing to Jesus, right? If they're not there, somebody's been lying, and we're going to get on to... The first step will be the least of their worries. But I know who'll be waiting in the parking lot to greet me. It'll be my grandparents, right? And my grandpa will wave at me, because if you're not 30 minutes early, you're late, right? I don't know how that works when you're dead, but he'll wave at me. And for the first time in my life, because I've been coming to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and hugging men when it wasn't convenient or necessary, I'm going to be able to hug my grandpa for the very first time and tell him I love him and thank him for giving me a safe place to live. My grandma, on the other hand, she's got to probably be praising Jesus, thanking God, and tell my grandpa, I told you so. And I know what she'll do. She'll kiss me. She'll tell me she loves me. She'll tell me she's proud of me. But for the first time in my life as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to be able to look my grandma in the eyes and say, Grandma, it's the damnedest thing. These people in this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, they found a solution to their problem and they introduced it to me. But most importantly, Grandma, some of those people showed me some grace. And in doing that, they introduced me to that kid inside of here that only you believed existed. That's because I took a first step. That's because I became manageable. I started doing the deal, right? You know, and the second step for me, this last part of the story, this is where the second step came in for me, right? I had to go speak at a state convention in Indiana, and it's one of Jimmy's conventions. I got there, and it's one of those ones where it's the 5 Midwestern states. It's all the delegates, and I'm not that guy. Like I said, I'm the guy that they have business meetings for. I steal money in AA. I fight in AA meetings. I'm just a bad example sometimes, right? And I told this guy, hey, you got the wrong speaker. What I can do is I'll pay my own flight home. I'll call one of my buddies that can come in and fill in for me. And the guy's like, no, you're the guy we want. I was like, no, I'm not the guy you want. He's like, no, you're the guy I want. I was like, no, I'm not. But the slogan for that meeting was a seat for everyone. I was like, well, this will bite him in the butt in about 2 days. Let's do it. Right? Man, I had a blast. Man, I remember I even called Jimmy. I got to meet guys that did stuff. I got to see the power of Alcoholics Anonymous in a different way, right? And I just learned a lot, and I got to enjoy the thing, and I was enthused. And that Saturday night, I was a banquet speaker, and after the banquet, you know, you speak, and then they have those dang things called gratitude lines. And I shared this last night. I don't know why they call them gratitude lines, because 10% of the people don't like you, right? There's always a guy that walks up and says, my sponsor says I have to thank you for the hour of my life I'll never get back. And then they walk off, you know, or they yell at you for cussing, or you talk about, you know, you sold drugs. I don't know how many people, you can't sell drugs in AA for God's sake. But I did, and it's, you know, I don't know what to tell you, right? But they don't like it, right? So I'm in this, and you know where they're coming from, right? You know when they're coming because you can feel that vibe. And so I'm shaking hands, and I look over and I lock eyes with this lady. I'm like, oh, Jesus, that's her. And I lock eyes with her again, and she's just staring at me, right? And I'm like, oh, man, this is bad. She looks pissed off, right? So I'm shaking hands, and she should be here by now, but she isn't. And I look up, and she's not there, and I go, oh. And she's at the back of the line, staring at me, right? I'm thinking, oh, this is bad. She is on a mission, right? Then it gets down to just her and I, and she's standing there, and I'm standing here, and she's standing there, and we're looking at each other. And she said, I'm a grandma. Can I give you a hug? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah, you know what I mean? I don't want to tell you what I was thinking, right? And so we start hugging, we start talking, and she tells me that she has a granddaughter that's 24 years old that's out there running and gunning, and people are saying a lot of bad things about her, and she's doing a lot of bad things with her body. But she says, she's my granddaughter, and I love her. I come to find out in that conversation, she's not a member of Al-Anon, and she's not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She was only there that night because her friend, who prays for her granddaughter every Sunday at church, her and her husband had banquet tickets, and her husband got sick, and she called her 10 minutes before to see if she wanted to come hear a story of hope. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. I didn't want to be there, right? And so we were sitting there, and then she starts to walk away, and she said something that changed my life. She turned around, she said, hey, do you know why your grandma wrote all that stuff down in those books? I said, no, I don't. She goes, I know why. And I said, why is that? She said, because your grandma knew that one day you would come back and pay it all back. Man, and it just started coming down, right? And as she turned around and she said to me, she goes, your grandma sees you and she's proud of you, and she walks off. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, what just happened? Right? Did I just make amends to my grandma? I didn't know. And I sat down in that chair, and I had my hands on my head, and I was trying not to be an idiot. And I look down, I see these big feet, and I look up, and there's this big kid standing there, and he's got a big old beard, and he's crying like a little, he's crying, right? And he says to me, I felt that. And I said, I didn't touch you. You know, I said, we have no problems with you. You're going to kill me. He goes, no, I felt that. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, when that lady was talking to you, I got goosebumps. I felt that. And I got to tell him, hey, this guy named Howard told me if you get goosebumps, that's God rubbing your back and telling you you're welcome. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. Right? 6 months later, I was in South Carolina, I think is where the Hilton Head is. And I spoke there, and after the thing, they have a gratitude line, and there's this guy standing there, and it's just him and I, and he's like, hey, do you know who I am? I said, no. He goes, I'm in your story. He goes, I'm Paul. I was like, Jesus. I go, what happened to your beard? He goes, my wife made me shave it. And I go, I would have never recognized you. I go, what are you doing here? He goes, I came to see you. And I said, all right. He goes, do you have time to talk? And I said, yeah. And we went and we sat down at one of those tables there, at round tables there, and we were talking, and he told me that when he met me, he just got done doing a second step. And he said, I was willing to believe there was a God, but I didn't know if God knew who I was. And my sponsor told me to act as if he did. So every morning I've been getting on my knees, and I say, God, I don't know if you know who I am, but my name's Paul. Could you help me stay sober today? He said, I said that prayer over and over and over. And I came to you at that convention. You told me when I got those goosebumps, that was God rubbing my back and telling me he got me. He said, it changed my life. He said, all I had to do was be a little willing to believe that there was something there. But when you said that and I felt that, I know there is a God. He said, I need to tell you, I stole your prayer that you say every morning. I said, what's that? He says, I get on my knees and I say the same prayer you do, Jason. I say, my dear friend, if you see fit and it be thy will, I sure appreciate it if I could stay in Alcoholics Anonymous another day. I said, you didn't steal that from me. That's yours. If you're new here and you're struggling, there is a solution, and you're going to hear it this weekend. But if you're having a problem with God, if you've ever had that tingling feeling, if you ever got goosebumps, that's God. You're welcome.